VLPSos here. This is a video lesson for Python programming, defining functions. These video lessons are made with the intention that they can be paused so that you can practice. Print is a function. It has a name. It has argument parameters, those parentheses, and it references other lines of code so that it performs a reliable task. The print function was created by the people that created the Python language. When you use the print function, it refers to other computer code to implement something very useful and easy for you to use. Print is a common function and it's recognized by IDLE in the standard library. That's why it colors the print as a recognized familiar word. Print is defined in the standard library. The name of the function has been added to the namespace of every Python program, which is a place in memory when a program runs that remembers what functions and variables have been called or have been defined. When we assign new variables, we add them to the namespace. We can also define new functions beginning with the keyword def. So we can create our own functions, and we'll provide an example of using the keyword def to define a function. What comes after the keyword def is the name that we choose the function to have. In this case, I'm going to call it a_fun, and we need to include the argument parameters, the parentheses, that distinguishes a function from a variable. And then we can give it some lines of code that this function will execute when we use this function. And this will be simple, a couple of print lines. This is a code block that has been defined under the function. And a second print line in the code block of the a_fun function will be here. We can write anything we want a_fun to do. Our a_fun function has a very simple code block. It's just these two print lines. a_fun has been added to the namespace, which means the place in memory where the computer is remembering the names that variables and functions have. Using it will now execute the code block that has been defined under the function. The function does not run automatically. We have to call it. We have to use it. Just like when we type print, we refer to the name print and we're calling the function print. If I save and run my program now, it doesn't do anything that we can see or the user can see. Our program did define this function, but we didn't call it. We didn't use it. So if we wish to use our function, we type its name, a_fun. Now when I save and run, we can see the code block of the function has been executed because we called the function, which ran the code within it. And make a note, the benefit of functions is that we can repeatedly use the function once it is defined. Another example, I'm going to use the keyword def to define another function that we call counter. Counter has its parentheses because it's a function, so it has function parameters. And then we have a colon. The code block for our counter function will include a for loop for count in range starting at 10, going to -1, and our for loop will print count and then once the for loop concludes, we will print go. If I save and run, I can see that I have the familiar code block from the afun being called. We haven't called our counter function. If we do, if we want to, then we simply refer to it by name. Now we can see that it's executed both of our functions. The counter function shows starting at 10, going to 0, and then printing go. We can make the use of the counter function a little more sophisticated by putting the counter, the call to counter, in a code in a for loop itself. So for whistle in range from 0 to 3, a for loop is going to iterate. It's going to iterate 3 times, and each time it's going to call the function counter. And what we see when we run our program is we see the counter function must have been called 3 times because 3 times we have the output 10 all the way to 0 and then go. So we can see that we've made use of our function by being able to repeat the code block. Every time we call it, we repeat the code block in counter. And to make a note, the counter function has been defined. Let's use it. And for this note to make sense, it might come before using it. And moving on. Like variables, you can name functions anything you want, but in the spirit of being coder friendly, you ought to name your functions descriptively. Also be warned, Python is so friendly that it will allow you to name functions that are already being used in the namespace, which means you can overwrite or reassign things that may cause problems if you're not careful. For example, if we forgot that print was a very familiar function already defined in the standard library, already recognized in the namespace every time we create a Python program, then we could ruin what print does by choosing to define a function with the very same name. For defining print, then I could say the code of the code block print would be something like I have successfully defined this function called print. I can see that there are no causes, no issues. I haven't called print. But if I call my function print, and save and run, we get an error. And the reason for it is because we redefined what print does. So if I use this print and I called the function that I just now created, inside of it then, when I wanted to print this string, the program no longer, or the language no longer, understands the print function as the one that will produce output. It was this line here that caused the error. And the error was print no longer expects things to be passed to it. There's nothing in the argument. Attempting to put a string inside this function caused the error because my definition doesn't require it. In other words, I have overwritten what the program language considers to be the print function. I have ruined the print function. So don't choose names that have already been or are already a part of the Python language. Python allows you to, and it's typically a bad idea. To make a note, we had to comment out the above code because the print function was redefined, which caused a problem when we wanted to use it the way we are accustomed. And finally, now you. You have seen how to define and call a function. Write your own function that executes more than one line of code, then call it a few times.